Buenas noches, Richie. Gracias por estar en el canal. Bienvenido. Bueno, gracias, Jan, por estar aquí. Yo quisiera empezar acerca del libro, indagando cómo crees que la verdad puede ser como realmente capturada en palabras o imágenes. O algunas veces siempre queda incompleta la subjetividad del observador.
First of all, good evening and welcome to John Jatenjor's interviews. So I'll be serving as John's interpreter today, but don't worry, you will be free to speak as long as you want. Okay. So There won't be like a space where I'll be translating John's words. So the first question would be, do you believe the truth can be truly captured in words and images, or it will always remain incomplete due to the observer's subjectivity?
I think that the viewer's subjectivity is exactly what brings truth to the forefront, because we live in a world where I think today everybody thinks that they can project their own objective truth, but in reality, every truth that somebody in a situation like the one I was in is applying some kind of subjective nature to it. So rather than try to pretend like I'm Mr. Objective person up in the cloud telling you everything that's going on, I just decided to subjectively provide my perspective. I think through a subjective perspective, you're able to obtain more truth than if somebody were to try to just tell you everybody who was right and who was wrong. It's like, I was there, I saw this, I saw that, and here's why I aimed my camera where I did. And I think through that process, if somebody reads it, they're able to not, look at the book and say, okay, this guy says this person's right and this person's wrong, so I'll take my own opinion. It's just, this guy lived through this. This was, I'm in his shoes. I saw what he did. And now I can see what it was like to be there and draw my own conclusions. So I think in a weird way, the more that our media gets diverged in this side or that side, the more important it is for people just to be honest about where they're coming from and what their subjective reality is, rather than pretending like they're some kind of arbiter of truth.
Bueno, ahí, Richie, lo más importante es que luego de esa respuesta hay que también conocer sobre la justicia, acerca de este tema, de cómo usted creería que la justicia, tanto en Estados Unidos, para ti es un ideal alcanzable o una ilusión moldeada por intereses de poder.
So the next question would be, do you believe the justice system in the United States, or the mere concept of justice, is an achievable ideal, or maybe it's just an illusion shaped by power interests?
Well, I think in a weird way, our court system actually, at least in the context of my experience with the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse and what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, actually brought more truth to the public than the media did during the year that led up to the trial. After the shooting took place, when I witnessed Kyle Rittenhouse shoot Joseph Rosenbaum, and then there were multiple shootings after that, everybody was going back and forth with these narratives. There are two different narratives that came out of Kenosha on the left and the right in America. And I wasn't really sure what the American justice system was going to bring out of that story. But ultimately, at the end of the trial, it became clear that because of the live broadcast of the entire trial and the fact that the prosecution and the defense each brought their own perspectives in front of everybody, that brought more truth to the public than what happened in the year prior, which was everybody consumed only their media diet, which was on the left or on the right. So everybody only saw one side of the story. But when the trial happened, everybody saw both sides of the story because there was the prosecution providing one side and the defense providing the other. And so when those two things were forced in front of everybody for them to watch, they were forced to see both sides of the spectrum rather than just the one side that they had seen the entire prior year. So I think that while every system in human modernity is going to be flawed inevitably somewhat, there was more truth that came out of the trial than what came out of the media. So I guess my answer would be that I don't think our justice system is perfect by any means, but I do think that the justice system in this context brought more truth to the public than the media was able to do. So I guess my answer would be that the media and the political media in America is more flawed than the justice system. So neither are perfect, but I think that the justice system prevailed in that case.
Perhaps they're like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And I think if people can see both sides of the coin, then they can synthesize their own answer for themselves. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book is say, here's what this side was saying, here's what this side is saying, but here's what I saw on the ground. And here's my subjective perspective on the ground. And I'm not saying you guys have to think this or you have to think that, but by seeing what the press was saying here and what they were saying there, and then telling people what I saw on the ground and what my opinion was after the fact, I let the audience decide for themselves. So I think critical thinking is something that's not valued anymore. But if people read the book, then they will understand, where everybody was coming from and also what I saw on the ground, and then they can just figure it out for themselves.
También, Richie, he visto que en Instagram, tu website y acerca del libro que han referenciado a los mejores podcasters de Estados Unidos, el cual es bueno, referente a temas de política. Pero hay algo que de pronto pienso yo de que te hacen falta por preguntar es acerca de, bueno, esta es otra pregunta referente a lo que ya tenía planteado y es si la justicia es ciega, ¿quién le susurra al oído al decidir en qué dirección gira uno la balanza, ¿no? Porque es algo más controversial.
All right, Richie. So the following question, continuing with the subject of justice, is that if justice is blind, who is whispering to its ear to choose on which direction the weight will be?
Yeah. Well, I think that the question of justice also applies to what the laws are in the first place. And that was something that applied to my experience specifically in Kenosha, in Portland, in Seattle. And in all those places, you saw politics encroaching upon the system of justice in a way where, because of these individual Democrat cities and their perspective on Donald Trump, they had one approach to 2020 and the Summer of Love, as it was called. And it wasn't so much whether Trump or the Democrats were right. I think each side was right in different instances, but each side was picking and choosing the realities that they wanted based upon the outcome that they desired. And so if Trump said this, then the Democrats did that. And so it was always, if this side is saying one thing, then the other side is saying the other. And ultimately, the reality that I experienced on the ground was somewhere in between. And so I guess in America and hopefully around the world, this idea of justice has to do not only with our politics and our justice system, but also the press and the individuals who are responsible with telling the public what's going on the ground. And so I think when you define the word justice, it's both public opinion and the court of law. And so if you look at 2020, there was a justice system that obviously was broken and that people were protesting, and that still is broken in many ways. But if you look at it from a broader perspective, the reason why I wrote the book is because I think there's a second layer to that, which is also not just who was proven guilty and not guilty, but also what is it that happened and how and why did that happen? And as somebody who was there, I also go beyond just, oh, guilty or not guilty. And I say, well, having been there, this is how I felt about it. And that's not to say that I'm also the end all be all of justice. But I think if people can take the court case and the, all the things that happened, all the unrest and all the lawlessness and all the people who were prosecuted and the people who were not prosecuted in those situations, because there were plenty of situations where people should have gone to jail and they didn't. My perspective on the ground is just an additional viewpoint that adds to that quilt of people understanding what happened. And I think the positive viewpoint that I have now is that with the internet and all the viewpoints that you can get now from all these people who are out there, not just the New York Times, not just the New York Post, not just these big news outlets, but everybody who is there has an opportunity to provide their perspective. And so mine is just one perspective, but I think that having been actually there, if people read what I experienced, they can add their own understanding of what happened, in addition to the courts, in addition to the corporate media, and in addition to what all the politicians told everybody was saying. So I guess ultimately justice is absolutely flawed, and it's absolutely something that never will be perfect. And our justice system, our courts, our political system will never bring that to the fore. But I do think with where the press is right now and the internet, you can have such a multitude of voices from people that you decide, oh, I trust that person. They were there. They're just telling me what they think. I think that you can determine your own viewpoint, and maybe, whether or not what happened was right or wrong is less important than what people take from it and how they move forward into the world and proceed into the future in a way where the bad things that happen can be turned into something that's positive rather than something that's negative.
También hay que destacar de que algunas veces la justicia se construye sobre la percepción pública, ¿no? En cierta parte, como habla acerca del libro. Bajo tu criterio, como escritor, ¿hasta qué punto los medios moldean no la esencia del libro, la esencia que viste al momento de crearlo?
The follow-up question will be basically about if justice is built on a public perception. To what extent does the media shape its essence based on what you experienced and based on what you ended up writing on the book?
Well, I think the interesting thing there is that what I witnessed on the ground was basically translated into two different stories. So whether it was in DC or New York or Portland or Seattle or Kenosha, what I witnessed on the ground would be, and what I filmed, what my videos filmed, different news outlets would pick this clip and put it there, and they'd chop it up into little pieces, and they'd take that little context and throw it there. And then this other side would take another clip and they'd throw that up. And so what they were doing was providing two different dueling realities that were not in any way congruent to each other. These are two realities that were actually opposed. But I think the interesting thing about my own experience is that when Kenosha happened, when the shooting happened, and when the trial took place a year later, was both of those perspectives on full display. And I think it's rare nowadays that people are able to see not only their own echo chamber, all the people they follow on Twitter and Instagram and all that, but also the other side. And so I think that the reality of whatever happened is never as black and white or as right and left as people want it to be. And everybody wants to put everything into a simple little box. But what I experienced was a whole level of tragedy that was not only right in front of me with the sad and angry people who were injured and killed in front of me, but also who their parents were and what happened before them and what wounds and scars they already had and how that factored into the way that they manifested themselves in the world. And so I think that the question of justice and the question of truth ultimately comes down to a much more diverse and difficult picture than what people might want to hear. Because when you're actually there and you actually spend a year trying to figure out why things happened, you realize how complicated things are and how the narratives that were put out were just ultimately surface level. And even the conclusion of the court case that I was a witness and a victim in, you know, you have guilty or not guilty. But just because somebody is not guilty doesn't mean they're necessarily like morally innocent. And so after Kyle Rittenhouse was pronounced not guilty, you know, I wrote an op-ed about how he is not guilty, but that doesn't mean that I have to feel good about it. And so human beings are much more complicated than just right or wrong or left or right. And when you try to place that within a narrative and a story, it needs to be something that's just beyond, hey, he's right, he's wrong. All right, we're good to go. Let's go home. That's it. And it doesn't have to, I don't necessarily say what the answer is, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't know the answer, and that's part of life. But that's part of also the beauty of life, is that if you can synthesize your own version of what happened and come to peace with that, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, then you can use that as something that makes you stronger rather than something that drags you down.
Bueno, la siguiente pregunta es acerca de, ya hablamos sobre la verdad, sobre el tema de las ideas, la justicia que a veces ciega, y bueno, la percepción pública, pero alguna parte, en medio de todo lo que se ve en el libro, por ejemplo, los ruidos de las protestas, referente a la tensión en las calles y todo, que las calles en Estados Unidos son muy grandes, muy largas, y todo lo que se ve en el día a día. ¿Alguna vez encontraste momentos de humanidad muy humanos referente a cosas que te hayan sorprendido, o es muy difícil ya sorprender? O sea, que tú te sorprendas respecto a ello.
So, amidst the noise and the chaos of these protests, because we know that amongst all of the violence and all of the horrible things that happen on these events, at the end of the day, it's by human beings. So, amongst those moments of tension and horror, did you find moments of humanity that might have surprised you, or maybe throughout all this journey that you've taken, you barely see scraps of some humanity left on these people?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, because in those moments when things get really bad, in this current day and age, I think people have become, because of what they see on the screen every day. You know, you log into Twitter or you log into movies and you see people dying. When it actually happens in real life, that has a tendency to, you know, desensitize you from what's going on. But in spite of all that, I think that through all of the protests that I witnessed, what I really saw was an immense desire for meaning, and an immense desire for people who were going to the streets precisely because they wanted something more from life. And while that can drive people to be angry and to lose their humanity, at the same time, it's in those moments when you can truly see people's character. And it's ultimately the individuals that I surrounded myself with, my friends and my family, who, when things got bad, that's when you realize who it is that's important in your life. So while many of the people may turn to anger and finger pointing and punching you in the face, and I got punched in the face enough times, or shooting you with their pepper balls and their riot munitions, or shooting each other with guns, my own experience was that the individuals that surrounded me, my coworkers specifically, when all this stuff happened, they came to my aid and helped me. And so it's at the times when you're most desperate that you realize truly who the people are that you surround yourself with, and the ones that care and the ones that don't. And what I was most surprised by was the people from across the political spectrum, whether it was left or right. There were plenty of people who said, "You're terrible because you know," ultimately it was just what I saw. It was like, I saw this, and a lot of people were mad because I saw this. A lot of people were mad because I saw that. But what I gleaned from the entire experience is that my closest group, my closest community, they were the ones who helped me when I wanted to be angry and when I wanted to do the same thing and point my finger. And so I think my biggest lesson from the entire experience is that when things get bad, it really comes down to who you pay attention to and why. And so it wasn't the people who were telling me, you need to say this or you need to say that when I was testifying in the trial. It was the people who said, hey, calm down and let's think about what really matters here. And there are people who got killed. And so there was a moment, I had footage that was of a man dying, and I didn't want to publish the footage because I didn't think it added anything to the case. It happened after the shooting, and a bunch of people accused me of deleting footage, and they claim that, you know, I was protecting this footage just because I wanted Kyle Rittenhouse to get off. But I knew that that wasn't the case at the beginning. And when a bunch of people in the media came out and lofted these accusations, oh, he deleted footage, he did this, I said to my family, oh, I'm going to publish the footage just to show them. Here's the footage. And I can show you guys that the reason why I didn't publish it is because it doesn't show anything. It's just a guy choking on his own blood. And when I went to publish that, my brother, he said to me, you said initially that you wanted to give that guy dignity in his death. And now just because a couple people on the internet said this or that about you, you're going to publish it all of a sudden. And when he told me that, I realized you're right. And I'm going to let them say that. They can say that. Fine. You guys can lie, but I'm not going to compromise my initial principles just because you guys said something mean about me. So it was, at the end of the day, the people who love me, who kept me from engaging in the same behavior. And I think that's the lesson from my story, is that when things get darkest is when you realize what's really important.
It's a pretty hard subject indeed, but without journalism, there's no way that people can know about those things. Sometimes you have to live it by yourself.
Por último, ¿cómo define este libro todo lo que ha hecho, la investigación, en una palabra?
And one final question, Richie, and thank you so much for being here with us. We wanted to ask you, how would you define this book that you just written and all of the experience you had while compiling this information, while investigating everything, and while experiencing firsthand the subject of riots and the crumbling of the justice system in the United States? How would you define this whole experience that led to this book in a single word?
Una palabra solamente. Can I do a compound now? I'm going to do a compound noun. Stranger than fiction. But if I were to do one word, it would be family, because so many of the people out on the ground had broken families, and what kept me from flying off the handle was my family. And I have incredible sympathy for all the people who were out there, only because I was so lucky to have my family there for me. And I feel like so many of those people weren't. And that's one of the reasons why they were desperate and violent. And if I could express to the next generation what was important from that moment, it'd be family.
Envía saludos a Colombia, Latinoamérica, para que pueda la gente disfrutar del libro y que donde lo puedan adquirir. Yo sé que está, bueno, en Amazon, pero ¿qué otras plataformas puede visibilizar la gente? En RIOT DIET.
RIOT DIET, I like that.
Sorry, my bad English.
No. RIOT DIET, I like that. I have to translate it. I'm working on that now. I'm working on translators to get it translated into other languages. And puedo hablar español, pero necesito más practicar.
We wanted to ask you, Richie, where can we find this book? Because we checked on the internet, it can be found on Amazon, but where can we find this and most of your work as well, since there's a lot of interest regarding protests and these social matters, which are very important nowadays for people to know about the horrors, and also as a way for them to find out a solution for these troubles.
Yeah, so Richie McGinniss with no spaces, at Richie McGinniss. That's my social media. It's the same everywhere. Then you can also go to pigeonpress.com. That's the publishing company that I started for the book. And I had to start my own publishing company because all of the big publishing companies wanted to tell me to pick a side, this side or that side. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I started my own, and it's called pigeonpress.com.
Ok, Richie, muchas gracias por la oportunidad. Gracias también a Lori por el enlace.
Gracias.
Y bueno, mucho éxito, te quedo.
Mucho gusto. Gracias, amigo.
Gracias, John.
Hasta luego.
Gracias, John.
Bye, Richie.